Okay, picking up from where we left off. Systemic risk is a risk underlying intertwined financial entities and markets, and it only continues to amplify as the participants continue to weave. Only continues to amplify is a big sentence, a lot of words, and it amplifies as the participant. Only continues to amplify is not necessary, just amplifies. Make it simple. What is more uncanny is that not more uncanny, it is uncannier is that modern network analysis presents, not more uncanny, uncannier, that resembles the patterns built into a spider's web, not necessarily the patterns of a spider's web. So spider's web has a pattern, don't forget. So wherever the is necessary, don't forget. Exacerbating. A systematic risk exacerbates the distance between the spirals is naturally reduced. Doesn't make any sense. A systemic risk exacerbating the distance between the spirals is naturally reduced, a process involving important financial institutions. So it's a connected sentence. And again, we put comma under and when a new sentence begins, or before and, such as. So for contagion to materialize, a crucial precept involves, not necessary, a crucial condition. Okay, we did this. The newly emerging crisis sparks research and creating more discourse than ever before. The newly emerging crises are spurring research and creating discourse to an extent not observed before. So the previous sentence, the newly emerging crisis spurs research interest to an extent, creating discourse than ever before. A better sentence is, newly emerging crises are spurring research and creating discourse to an extent not ever before. So the whole thing has been creating to an extent not ever before. Superfluous sentence. The contributions in this domain brings in techniques spanning across multiple territories. Not a good line. The contributions in this domain not brings in present techniques used in many fields, not spanning across multiple territories, better used in many fields. Simple. Including, okay. Despite proving a platform for investigators to test the efficacy of their models, the external literature sways from answering the long-standing question. Okay, make it easier. Despite proving a platform for investigators to test the efficacy of the models, not the external literature sways, the long-standing questions remained unanswered by the extant literature. We don't need sways. We just remove sways. The long-standing questions remain unanswered by the extant literature. The motivation was to remove sways. Commentators have drawn systemic risk and contagion apart. Bad sentence. Commentators have separated systemic risk and contagion, drawn apart. Why? And immersed themselves into pooling numerous factors that ultimately led to, and immerse themselves into combining numerous factors, pooling not necessary, that has ultimately led to any one of the concerns. This has in turn resulted in investigators looking away from finding a continuum producing beauty pattern. This has in turn resulted in investigators looking away from discovering a continuum, not finding a continuum, from discovering, because we're talking about innovation in research. While majority of the studies, most of the studies, simple, not majority of the studies, and external literature is always the. External literature starts with the external, not external, the external literature. Well, some studies cover a specific crisis. Some studies have covered a specific crisis because we are making it past. Others have selected few institutions. Okay, fine. Lying dormant in the institutions, not included in the sample. Therefore, inferences are often tentative and speculative when it comes to assessing the impact of a crisis as a whole. Impact of a crisis as a whole, not good. The overall impact of a crisis. Rewriting the overall impact of a crisis. Similarly, when some studies focus on endogenous cycles, have focused the risks endowed within, the risks found within, the risks endowed. The risk found is much better than endowed, simpler. The risks found within the global linkage have been overlooked. In regards to global approaches, rather we can start it regarding global approaches, it becomes shorter. Okay. Often, well-developed indicators relay varying messages corresponding to different crises peripheries. Different crisis peripheries. Rather, make it simpler. Relay varying messages, specific to each crisis that affects the peripheries in different ways. Corresponding to different peripheries doesn't sound nice, doesn't sound simpler. Varying messages specific to, so it was a simple, smaller sentence, we're making it bigger. Corresponding to different crisis peripheries. No. Instead of corresponding to different crisis peripheries, let's break it up. Specific to each crisis that affects the peripheries in different ways. What is a more? Let's use moreover instead of that. Okay. Then comes, after critically reviewing many papers spanning across crucial tenets of studies sprouting out of crisis literature. Oh, why would you make it so complicated? Spanning across crucial tenets of studies sprouting out, the whole sentence replaced. After critically reviewing many papers relevant to crisis literature, simpler. Important gaps were found concerning crisis identification and modeling. So previous sentence was important gaps concerning crisis identification and modeling are found. So are found should not be at the end. Okay? Important gaps were found before we shift it up. It is observed that external literature draws on a preconceived notion. So it is observed at the, we don't need, it is observed at the external literature, easy. Okay? Associated, let's not use endowed. Crisis transmission and risks endowed within a system, no. Crisis transmission and associated risks within a system, easy. It is observable that there exists a lack of synergy. The whole thing, again, replacing it is observed or observable. There is a lack of synergy in the studies concerning micro and macro, comma. And as such, crisis concerning system and contagion. And as such is not necessary, resulting in differentiating opinions. So the previous line was, there's a lack of synergy in the studies concerning micro and macro potential goals, and as such drives the tenets concerning systemic risk or contagion away from each other while belonging to the same vein of studies. Very complicated. Let's just cut it off. Away from each other while belonging to the same tenet of studies. The whole sentence is being cut off. We are writing, there is a lack of synergy in the studies concerning micro and macro potential goal, resulting in differentiating opinions concerning systemic risk and contagions. Beautiful. Resulting in differentiating opinions. Okay. No one is being, driving anyone away from each other. Just differentiating. This gives rise to a contentious debate that either contagion or systemic risk studies may suffice while explaining crisis. Rather, we write, this gives rise to a contentious debate about whether contagion or systemic risk studies may suffice to explain crisis. Explaining crisis, but to explain crisis. Okay. This is conducive to roll out projects modeling or identifying crises without having to address major issues, such as those endowed within financial networks. Again, remove endowed, such as those found within financial networks. Okay. Securitization. Okay. And similar focuses. that are naturally built into systemic risk. Not build, it's always built. And similar focuses is not necessary. Systemic risk contagion that are naturally built into the systemic risk and systemic crisis. And similar focuses are superfluous. Okay, so we are writing that such as those found within financial networks, feedback loop, securitization, and investor risk tolerance that are found that are naturally built into the systemic risk and systemic crisis into the. However, the primary focus of identifying a continuum, drawing a predictive pattern in crisis. However, the primary focus is a cutoff writing. However, in primarily focusing on identifying a continuum that draws a predictive pattern, in primarily focusing on instead of the primary focus on drawing. So replacing the primary focus of drawing with in primarily focusing on that draws. So simpler. Precluding that precludes. So the thing is, when we're using connecting two sentences, we don't use ing in the later sentence. Okay, so don't end the sentence with an ing. How that has changed? The primary focus of one sentence at drawing, second sentence. Rather than that, the primarily focusing on that draws, ending with not ing. Again, greatly affected due to one focus precluding all others. Instead of that, precludes all others. Okay? Alright. Based on the aforementioned gaps, the thesis investigates pattern in crisis propagation. It aims to identify sources more contagious compared to counterparties in the pre-crisis and post-crisis periods. Pre-crisis, during crisis, and post-crisis. So let's simplify it. This thesis investigates patterns in crisis propagation, and aims to identify, connecting to sentences now, aims to identify more contagious sources compared to counterparties in the pre-crisis, crisis, and post-crisis period. Okay, so now it is easy to connect to sentences. Always revise 2 times. If it is easy to connect them, just connect them 2-3 times. Read the sentence. The thesis ordains to ensure consistency in that it attempts to disentangle crisis effects from a single data source. In that, not necessary, not a very good word. Okay. The thesis ordains to ensure consistency by attempting to disentangle crisis effects from a single data source. In that it attempts, old traditional way, by attempting to simply. Okay. This is because, no, not it, again, this is because, always start the sentence with this, no matter what Grammarly says. This is because varying sources of potential indicators often leads to disproportionate outcomes. No, varying sources is wrongly positioned. This is because potential indicators from various sources. What is this kind of writing? Varying sources, potential indicators from various sources often lead to disproportionate outcomes. Fine. Also, this thesis also, instead of also the thesis, you can write this thesis also examines. Nice. In sourcing crisis, examines the dynamics of investors' risk tolerance in sourcing crisis. No. In detecting sources of crisis. Okay. Beautiful. Investigate the changing dynamics in networks. Okay. Spanning, well, restructuring, including the restructuring of entry cases, while restructuring the entry cases. And so, including the restructuring. Okay, so the sentence objective is motivated by 30 episodes of crisis over 2 decades spanning across major economies while restructuring the entry cases. No, including the restructuring of the entry cases. The restructuring of the entry cases is an event happening. So that is included. There is a resurgence of studies now in studies. Okay. Yet it is important to understand, not yet, but it is also important. Instead of yet, use but it is also. But also. Instead of yet, but also. You understand the effects of such changing networks. Okay. Specifically, this will provide insights on how differently a common episode affects advanced market. No, not on. This will provide insights into. We always provide insights into how differently a common episode affects different market compared to emerging. Next comes detect a pattern in case transmission over 2 decades of case episodes. Okay. Visualize an anticipated crisis transmission pathway along a 2-dimensional plateau. Rather. So next sentence. This objective differs from studies concerning stress testing or risk topography in classifying crucial episodes and indicators, in that this objective focuses on proposing patterns. The usage of in that is always wrong for me, so the writer changed it. Topography in classifying crucial episodes and indicators. Also, rather, this objective focuses on proposing patterns that regulates can simulate and intervene to divert the pattern and avoid crisis hitting home. Crisis hitting home is bad. Setting of a crisis setup. So not in that, rather this objective focuses on proposing patterns to successfully divert pattern and avoid setting of a crisis. Examine turning network links off helps deter crisis. Bad. Examine the turning off of network links. Turning off of network links to help deter crisis. The objective investigates the implication of turning big links off. Okay, that's a measure. Providing ing in the onset of a crisis. Wrong use. At the onset, not in the onset. At the onset. In an attempt to decouple with source markets, not source markets. Decouple with is wrong. Decouple from source markets. It is important to examine. Therefore, it is important to examine. Connect the sentences. It is also important to understand. Not necessary. Therefore, it is important to examine and the importance of certain periphery. So, what I did is, it is important to examine. It is also important to understand the importance. So, I used 2 different sentences. Let's connect it. Therefore, it is important to examine and the importance. Good. Examine the efficacy of a novel science-relevant network to model crisis. This objective is to prove that sign risk measures are better suited. That whether, okay, crisis, then, not then, compared to popular, compared to, not then, compared to. Okay, don't use then much. Use compared to. Such comparisons concentrates on the degree of misidentifications if crisis modeling is reliant on single framework. No, such comparisons discard the misidentifications, not concentrates on the degree of misidentification. No, discards the misidentifications. Okay, crisis modeling is reliant on single framework and more single framework, more and more than one framework may not only complement the findings of these frameworks. Okay, rather they suggest that more than one framework may complement the findings of these frameworks and also reduce the gaps. Rather, use rather a lot, use and a lot to connect sentences. Hence, this objective addresses. No, it is important to discover. Not only this object addresses, it is important to discover. Okay. Detect sources of crisis across past episodes. So it's a quite big video. We have learned a lot.